Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope you've had a wonderful week, and I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's been a ton of stuff that has happened over the last week of news, of course, and there's a lot of stuff that's happened in Ukraine as well as elsewhere throughout the world. And this is the point in which we kind of do this whole project. That's kind of what we're all geared towards, is because we want to bring awareness to these situations and provide you a way of giving back to them. So in the description of this video, you'll find a ton of different organizational links that are down there. 70% or more of the donations that all of those organizations receive go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people which are directly affected by these news stories we talk about every single time we go live. And so if you can, please go through down there and provide as much support to them as you can. And if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do to help us is actually by spreading the word about the channel, the likes and subscribes, commenting on the videos, of course, but also sharing this amongst your friends and communities is always a helpful way to get the word out there, to let people know about what this project is doing, and to try and help as many people throughout the world as we physically can. We also have our own initiative, which we have been running for some time now, even though we did take a break, and we did successfully assist the 54th Mechanized Brigade actually assisted in repairing one of their vehicles, which had received battle damage. So that is still ongoing. We continue, and we hope to do a lot more with it. So thank you for those that have been supporting that effort as well. And so, if as we're here, of course, we are live and I'm watching the live chat. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to throw them into the live chat or just jump in and say hello. It's always nice to see everyone in there. If you are here to ask some questions, to give you a little bit of a background on myself, I served as a Marine in 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines between 2016 and 2020. During that time, I did 2 tours in the Middle East. My first tour was between October of 2017 through March of 2018. I spent 4.5 months in the country of Syria. I was attached to Special Operations Forces there, and I assisted in fighting the Islamic State in Operation Inherent Resolve, as well as providing stabilization efforts there within the northeastern part of the region. I spent about 1.5 months in Kuwait during that time as well in transit before coming back home. I took over as the Armory NCOIC, or non-commissioned officer in charge, and I spent about 2 years running the armory. Now, then I redeployed back to the Middle East between October of 2019 and March of 2020. During that time, I was attached as a Javelin team leader with Easy Company 27. Before then going to the U.S. Embassy on New Year's of 2020, where I spent that entire endeavor dealing with the protesters there and the attacks on the U.S. Embassy, resecuring it, and I oversaw all anti-arm operations on the Baghdad Embassy complex itself. There, went down to Saudi Arabia, trained Saudi Arabian Marines before, of course, returning home. I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine, but I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, fully cross-trained rifleman, partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what most Marines are going to receive. And I do have real-world experience providing aid to battlefield casualties. In my commercial life, I am also a logistical coordinator for a motor vehicle transportation company. Outside of that, I have a lot of interesting things I have a lot of things I am interested in, such as history, human geography, and the likes of that, though I claim not to be an expert in any of it. But I do hope that regardless of what I'm an expert or not in, please do your own research. And if you would like to have a point to start at, all of these maps are provided to you guys, as well as the links for them in our on our website, so you guys can actually go and check it out or follow along as you see fit. And so with that, we immediately can now move into the news, and we get to the major points that have happened over the last week. And as we jump down here, we start off, of course, with the top story in Ukraine. Unfortunately, as we go over here to the capital of Kyiv, we can see that there is, we do have the solemn duty of reporting, unfortunately, the child casualty updates and the war crimes, because there are a lot of them, and it's a very important point that is kind of the driving factor behind the whole war and the whole mindset behind supporting Ukraine for many countries. This comes from the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. We can see, quote, Russian war crimes statistics for the past week, May 26th through July 2nd, 2023. 1,331 new crimes were registered. At least 484 children have been killed, 992 injured, and the data without full consideration of places of active hostilities, end quote. We can take a look at that coming from their official Twitter here. and they do post this graphic in English on their official Twitter. So far, 90,835 crimes of aggression and war crimes have so far been recorded by the Prosecutor General's office, as well as 17,295 crimes against national security. 484 children were killed, with an additional 992 injured. And we can see some of the hotspots on the map here, and lots of major incidents being recorded in places such as Kyiv and Kupiansk, and of course Kherson. But they are not the only ones reporting on this. The United Nations also reporting on this and following up with their own updates. UN human rights monitors in Ukraine have stated that 6 children were killed and 34 were wounded in May alone, bringing more than 1,500 the total number of child casualties since Russia's armed attack against Ukraine over 14 months ago. 1,500 children have either been killed or wounded as a result of the war in Ukraine. And on top of that, according to the United Nations, the grim milestone of the 1,000th attack on healthcare inside of Ukraine. So the World Health Organization did confirm the 1,000th attack on healthcare inside of Ukraine. Police 911 says, I'm Lithuanian. Reason we support Ukraine, Russia exists. Yeah, that's see, here's the thing with how we like to run the channel. You don't want to put everyone inside of a box. Keep in mind, Russia is made up, the modern Russian Federation has been made up of a large number of ethnic groups and different political ideologies. Whether you're looking about the Islamic places such as Chechnya or Dagestan, or if you're looking up in the Eastern Orthodox forces of Muscovy, or pretty much all throughout the Siberian wilderness, where there are sparse and in some cases nomadic peoples, or even in the Far East as you get towards in Mongolia. So you don't want to just put everyone into kind of a box. And so I can understand that as a country, Russia exists. And there's a lot of hatred because of that, especially in former Cold War era occupied nations. Following World War II, of course, the occupation and establishment of communist regimes inside of places such as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, even East Germany, Czechia, really Yugoslavia at the time until it fell apart in 91. But I think there's an important distinction between hating a Russian government and hating Russian people. That's something that I've always been very adamant about. I have had issues with that in the past with the Middle East myself, and that's something I had to learn to get over. And I had to understand that there were issues with that. But it's okay to hate someone's government. It's different to hate a people. So I always want to make sure that distinction remains clear. Speaking of Russia, however, we actually come over here. This is over to Shevkino, which is here along in the Belgorod Oblast of Russia. This is a border region that has served as a vital logistical hub for Russian forces, especially earlier on in the war. And as a result of recent conflicts, we saw an incursion last time that we had talked. Now there's even more. It seems that the continuation there has continued. And so, as we go through here, so the fighting does continue in Belgorod Oblast. This is on the part of the Freedom of Russia Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps. They have continued to fight in Belgorod Oblast. They're drawing a massive amounts of attention away from the front lines areas there in the east, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. And we can see here that intense artillery barrages, sporadic fighting have all occurred along the border region. In fact, the Free Russian forces have also stated they've already taken Russian POWs, so they've already taken prisoners of war from that area. Russian military forces have already begun to rush troops into that area to reinforce it and to try and counterattack and try and push those Free Russian forces back across the border and into Ukraine. KG in the loggers says Denilov, a high-ranking Ukraine official, says the exact same thing as your viewers. So are you starting to be against Ukraine now? No, I'm not at all against Ukraine. So that's the thing. So while we do try to have we try not to have a bias on a lot of situations, you can't take a look at the situation in Ukraine and not have a bias towards Ukraine. In the words of well, in the words of many, in fact, but in the words of Elie Wiesel, to not take sides in the oppression of people, or to not take a stand on either side, only helps the oppressor and never the victim. And so we do have a bias when it comes towards Ukraine, because what's happening in Ukraine, regardless of what issues, internal strife issues have happened in the past, or what issues they are still continuing to have, very adamantly, they have even reported themselves issues with corruption, issues with working with hostile nations and the likes. They are still being oppressed. You can't look at what has happened in Bucha or Irpin, and you can't be affected in some personal and emotional way by these kinds of things. You can't sit by and watch this. Thousands of people are killed and injured. Innocent people are killed and injured. Everyone and anyone, and I do implore you to go do this, can go read on the UN website the articles which are established in the 1949 Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, as well as additional conventions after that, including the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW, which outline war crimes, not just war crimes, but the difference between war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity and genocide. And when you look at what's happening inside of Ukraine and as a result of the conflict here, especially on the Russian side, these aren't complex statements. These aren't complex legal terms that are being used. When you look at these statements, it's very easy for you and I to read. If you take children from a group, and this can be based off of national lines, ethnical lines, religious lines, and you take them and you put them with another group, that is a crime of genocide. Period. Period. That is it. Period. When you're calling for the extermination of an entire country based off of national lines, as we've seen the Russians do very publicly. You've getting Prigozhin, who is also known as Putin's chef, part of Putin's inner circle. Putin himself, who said that the country of Ukraine doesn't even exist. Then that is perpetuating genocide. That's hate speech and genocide. These are things that you must look at, and you must look at these things objectively. The Ukrainian government is explicitly stating they will mass murder all Russians on all land they take. You're supporting this side doing genocide. No. All land that they take, meaning, if you are part of an invasion force coming into Ukraine and are part of the people committing these atrocities, such as the 7th Air Assault Brigade for the Russians, aka the VDV, who only exist really in name now after they were horrifically slaughtered in places like Irpin on Hostomel, then if you came onto Ukrainian land, if I was a Ukrainian, I'd probably kill you too. That's just how it goes. Don't invade other people's countries, and you probably will live a long and prosperous life. It usually helps. Also, don't mass murder people. That usually also helps for your image. Or wearing red armbands with white circles in the middle of them for your Victory Day parade. That makes you look exactly like the Nazis. That probably just helps too with the image. So, as we continue on here, we take a look at the fighting in Belgorod. We can see some of this fighting coming out here. This is from artillery strikes here inside of, this is near Shebekino, which is in Belgorod Oblast. Take a look. As we can see here, this is all coming from drone footage. They have one of those drones that are watching and also being used to correct artillery bombardments. These are along border checkpoint areas. Once again, we can take a look here. I see Kenny G is continuing with his insane rant. Russia's contract army is double the size it was at the beginning of the. Oh, you go by special military operation. You lost. NATO lost. America lost. Russia beat you. Stop being delusional before your nation dies from it. I have no fears of the Russian military whatsoever, from personal experience. See, if you go back to 2018, like when I said I was in Syria, you may remember the fact that we killed, over 300 Russian contractors of the Wagner Group in February the 7th, evening of February 7th, morning of February the 8th. So, from personal experience as part of the QRF force that responded to that incident, I have absolutely no fear of the Russian military whatsoever. Never have been afraid, never will be afraid. They are tactically and strategically inept in their abilities. They, if you look at Russian military command, by the way, their contractual army, that's incorrect. You're talking about their standing army, which has doubled, and their standing army has doubled because of two key things. One is their military. They're not being contracted; they're being conscripted. And secondly, so that's increasing their numbers. Secondly, you're looking at the fact that, like I said, in regards to the 7th Air Assault Brigade for the VDV, they exist only in name, and the reason why that there are entire units which have been completely destroyed. And I mean wiped off the face of the earth, and they exist only in name. And that's because the Russians are not releasing casualty figures. In fact, the last casualty figures that I remember seeing of any kind from the Russian side was approximately 1,500, which have been killed and wounded in the special military operation, which had been released, I want to say, about April of last year. And we have not seen any others outside of that. Now, we do know that when you call up 150,000, 300,000, or looking at conducting additional conscription, that probably doesn't mean that things are going particularly well. We know things are not going particularly well, just from the combat side of things. Military operations that attempt to conduct themselves on 7 separate axes require a lot of logistical know-how. Russian logistics just simply doesn't have that. In fact, if you look at the numbers, for the 15 battalion tactical groups that Russia deployed at the beginning of the conflict when they first invaded, these are their best forces. This is their best equipment that they can possibly have, and the best troops and best troop numbers they're going to have. They are at their peak force sizes they will ever have before taking combat losses. They are being rushed in. Out of 15 units that went in, battalion tactical groups, that requires roughly about 6,000 logistical vehicles, and between the recovery vehicles, maintenance vehicles, between transportation vehicles, and the likes. They only had about 4,300, so which is about 2/3 of what they actually needed to successfully run this. Keep in mind, they're conducting an invasion literally from their border. They're doing it from inside of Russia, and they were unsuccessful with that. You see unsuccessful in many different scenarios, whether you're talking about tactically, they are inept when it comes to taking the initiative in the battle space. They are very much a top-down heavy force, heavy reliant on officer control, and they have a very large officer corps with essentially no NCO or non-commissioned officer corps. In fact, to carry out those orders and to have some kind of a chain of command that allows them to have any kind of initiative. Now, Russia attempted to start to do this, especially within the VDV, but you still see that they were, well, very unsuccessful. Part of that was there's a number of reasons why the large air assault on Hostomel Airport was unsuccessful. There are many different things that could have been done, or could have been improved when it came tactically. But needless to say, the Russians will never really have the ability to do that ever again. You don't see any large air assaults anymore. You're not seeing any large air assaults. You're never going to see any large air assaults going forward after Hostomel Airport, because the situation and the personnel required simply doesn't exist. The element of surprise is no longer there. The equipment is no longer there. And now the manpower and air defense capabilities of Ukraine have increased to the point that really you can't even get really jet pilots into the air. In fact, if you do get them into the air, the Russians are shooting their own jets down occasionally, as we saw with an Su-25 not very long ago. So it's they're inept, they're incapable in basically every other way. And when it comes to Ukraine, you don't have to be better than, you don't have to be as good as the UK's military or the German military or the French military or the United States military. You just have to be better than the Russians when it comes to militarily. In war, there is no second place. You either win or you're dead, and that's how it goes. There is no second place. There is no anything else. It is, you are either the winner of the engagement and you get to live, or you're dead. Period. And right now, Ukraine is the winner of the engagements, and the Russians are very dead. And they have not changed their tactics. They are not attempting to change their tactics. They have not even, in fact, the regression in military equipment that they're using is the only thing we can even indicate that they're changing their tactics. And it's not out of a want to do it. It's because they simply don't have the supplies of T-90s and T-80s, modernized T-80s specifically, to actually maintain a proper battle force. They simply don't have it. So they have to have T-62s and T-55s and T-54s. The only thing that you can go older than that is you are starting to look at equipment that is used from World War II. Remember that. To go older than what we have seen already hitting in the battlefield, being shipped to the battle space, you have to go into World War II. The T-54, for instance, T-54-55, when the first prototype T-54-55 rolled off of the production line inside of Russia, actually inside of Ukraine, but at the time it was under the Soviets. When that rolled off its production line, the T-54, T-55, Hitler was still alive. That is how old that tank is. When the prototype rolled off the production line in 1945, Hitler was alive. So, inept. Complete ineptitude and incapability on part of the Russian forces. So no, I do not fear them whatsoever. Never have, and I never will. Here's the Free Russian Legion with their POWs. Take a look.
Ну что ж, друзья, я только что вернулся из новой Толожанки. Как мы и ожидали, господин Гладков не посчитал нужным, не нашел в себе мужества обменять свое драгоценное время на жизни и свободу, как он успел выразиться, наших пацанов. Вот те самые ваши пацаны, которых господин Гладков убил нашими руками в своем видео. Как вы успели заметить, за время моего отсутствия ваших пацанов в нашем плену стало гораздо больше.
Эти русские мужчины не по своей воле взяли в руки оружие.
Showing off their prisoners. Fred and Fred. Russia outproduces all of NATO in all categories of weapons. You are a nutter or brainwashed on fake news if you think Ukraine can beat Russia is literal insanity. Okay, so the attempt to outproduce just the United States is what caused the collapse of the arguably much stronger Soviet Union. Like, that caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. The reason millions of people starved to death, the reason that millions died in testings and all sorts of shit, is insane. Because they were trying to just outproduce the United States. The United States is only using about 10% of its wartime capability, like production capability, in case you didn't know. In fact, they actually shut down a tank plant. Like, we had two. They said we didn't need the other one, and now we're running on one tank facility to produce Abrams tanks. It's in I want to say Lima, Ohio. So, like, that's a thing. And then also, Russia does not outproduce the world's largest arms exporter is the United States. We own 50% of weapons worldwide, like globally, when it just comes to private citizens, let alone our military capability. Our military production capability is unfathomable. And while, yes, Russia outnumbers us in certain categories, artillery systems and air defense systems, artillery systems and air defense systems, which were produced during the time of, you guessed it, the Soviet Union, which collapsed trying to outproduce the United States. Just the United States. Not the French, not the Brits, not the Polish, not the Germans, not anyone. Just the United States. So yeah, you can't just sit there and go, we outproduce, Russia outproduces. No, what they're really good at producing, or what they really have, is an immense stockpile of Soviet era equipment that they've always. In fact, in 1991, when the Russian Federation was formed, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, one of the first things the Russian Federation actually went through and did is they did an inventory of all military stockpiles that they had. And you know what they found? They found artillery shells from 1918 from artillery guns they didn't even have in stock anymore. Russia is immensely good at hoarding weapons and equipment that they produce even when it's no longer viable. They had artillery shells from 1918 for guns they didn't even have anymore. Not even in ceremonial service. Just because they wanted to have the ammunition. Just because they wanted to have the weapons. So, you're not really seeing a lot of production when it comes to the Russians. You're seeing a lot of pull from stockpiles. He says that the United States doesn't even have TNT. We're buying from Japan to make artillery rounds. The USA only produces 300 Patriot missiles a year. Russia is going to bomb Ukraine until they run out of ammo, then occupy the whole land. Once again, the United States is only using 10% of its really military production capacity. To give you an idea, you look at peak of, which would be about May to July of 1943, peak production capability for the United States, and 93% of everything made went to the war effort. In the United States, 93% of all production in the United States in May of 1943 went to producing the war effort. We could build a victory ship in 7 days. 7 days to produce a cargo ship or a destroyer, Fletcher-class destroyer. And the United States retains that capability. Things like rare earth metals, things like forests, things like, oil. You ask why, a lot of people ask, well, why don't we just pump our own oil? We could actually outproduce. Though, think of those like resource tiles in a game. They're finite. They only last so long. So why use them when you don't need them, when there's going to be a much worse time at some point later down the road that you do actually need them. If you've used them up until that point, that's it. You don't get to use it later. Once again, the United States, people don't understand that the United States is not to be it's not to be messed with. The ability to outproduce economically. Soldiers win battles, economies win wars is the saying. And the United States has one of the largest economies in the world. It's one of the largest industrial bases in the world. We don't even use most of it for wartime capability. And secondly, as we're looking at this stuff, I want you to remember something. Outside of Javelin anti-tank missiles, when the war first started, Ukraine had what they got from the Soviets. And that was really it. Outside of a few Javelins, not even that many systems, about 1,400 systems of the Javelin anti-tank missile system, with limited stocks of any type of anti-armor capability. And not even having Western support or equipment yet, they still pretty much completely halted and then reversed the Russian advance on all 7 axes. Another good example is the amount of money that we pour into our defense spending. The United States, $748 billion in defense spending. The Russians, about $65 billion. And so with that, we continue to move on. This is one of the video vloggers, I want to say, for IZ, who is in Shevakino. Take a look.
Город эвакуируется, идет массированный артобстрел. Мужики пока что держатся, но непонятно, получится удержаться или не получится. Все, кто видит, репостите, показывайте, что это не Шемякино, это Шебекино. И тут идут бои. Пускай, говорящие головы узнают, что здесь не просто какая-нибудь херь. Привет.
Мы, Легион Свободы России, сейчас находимся возле границы нашей Родины. Очень скоро мы выдвинемся вновь на территорию России, чтобы принести свободу, мир и спокойствие. Грайворон – это только начало. Вследствие трусливости путинских военных шакалов нам досталось много трофеев. Благодаря этому мы сможем больше вооружить наших соратников. Мы идем освобождать всю Россию, от Белгорода до Владивостока. Для этого, чтобы в Москве был поднят бело-синий-белый флаг свободы. Мы, Легион Свободы России, сейчас находимся...
Ну что ж, друзья, бойцы русского добровольческого корпуса снова ведут бои на территории Российской Федерации. Совсем скоро покажется окраина Шебекина. К сожалению, мы не можем обеспечить эвакуацию мирных жителей из приграничных районов, потому что армия Российской Федерации обстреливает эти районы и таким образом затрудняет эвакуацию. Находитесь в домах, не волнуйтесь, бойцы русского добровольческого корпуса не воюют с мирными жителями. Ну что ж,
And so with that, we move on. I see a nice, wonderful joke from my police 911. It says, "No panic, everything is going great for Russia. T-14 armadas are just around the corner to save the day." And hails more copium. It's funny. So the T-14 Armada, which is the newest, it's actually in prototype production because no other country on Earth actually wants to buy it. One of the biggest reasons why the Russians don't have a lot of T-14s is because in order to build lots of tanks, your country really doesn't build lots of tanks by itself. Your country builds lots of tanks because other countries see them at like weapons and arms expos, and they go, "I really want this thing. This looks like it would really upgrade my military force, and it's reasonably priced or whatever." And so they put in orders for T-14 Armadas. That was the hope. That's where the funding comes from to build these nice tanks. The Abrams, there are domestic models of the Abram, which uses depleted uranium inside of its armor plating. There are different models, export models, which are being used, for instance, inside of Saudi Arabia and Egypt, who maintain Abrams tanks. So that's that's how these tanks come around, and there's not a lot of T-14 Armadas, and the reason no one wants to buy them is because they're one of the biggest issues for them is the fact that their engines are horrifically underpowered for the armor that they're actually boasting. Most of their systems aren't actually operational. Their Arena Cast close in air defense system isn't operational, and they tend to have issues with the turret jamming because of the lack of crew inside the actual turret. Much like the Abrams X design that General Dynamics was proposing, there's no crew in the turret. So if something goes wrong, it's not manual to be able to fix it. And there's not even crew in the turret for if something goes wrong with the autoloader to fix it. Everyone's inside of its own separate compartment, and so when these things, which are prone to having jamming issues because of the turret shape and dynamic, there's no crew able to actually fix that without getting out of the tank, essentially, and getting into the turret from the outside of it, and then trying to, with the very minimal amount of room inside the turret, try and actually fix this. That, and it's extremely high price for what it is. It's not exactly it's not really a great tank overall. It really, the only thing it boasts is the fact it has a little bit longer range and its main gun that most Russian tanks do, which is about 4 kilometers or 4,000 meters right now, and it's not even that impressive. In fact, without getting into too much specifics, there are several TOW missile variants, which is the older anti-tank missile system that can actually outrange the T-14 already. We know that it can be outranged, and that's with the older missile designs, let alone radio frequency TOWs or anything that was a little bit after I got out. Come down here, and this is in Kostanivka, which is in this whole general area, Kramatorsk, Donetsk Oblast. And we can see our latest daily Donetsk update coming from Pavel Korolenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. And he says, quote, on June 3rd, number of victims in the Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 4 killed, 8 injured. And we do get this from his official graphic, which he posted both in Ukrainian and in English every single day. And we do see that at this point, 1,548 people have been killed, and an additional 3,644 have been injured. These are civilians inside of these regions. Keep in mind, this does not include areas currently under occupation. So places like Volnovakha, places such as Mariupol, all these are not considered inside of these because these aren't verifiable. Fred says, this is a good thing Russia's arming their new army with T-90s. The T-90... So, you know what? I have a book for this. Where is my book of knowledge? Boom. For those that don't know, this is my book of knowledge. The book of knowledge is my anti-tank missileman's handbook that I received when I went through training. And one of the biggest things that you have to do hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and test on is armor identification, understanding tanks from both friendly and foreign countries, their capabilities, and how to identify them on the battlefield, as well as what they're capable of doing. Everyone also say hello to Javelin, who is apparently the co-host for tonight. He is the newest addition to the family, and he is an adorable boy. And yes, I named him after my favorite anti-tank missile. So, let's see. Let's get over here, see if I can find the T-90. There it is. The lovely T-90. So, how it's described is... Well, the T-90 is basically a late model T-72 chassis mated with a late model T-80 turret. Not really anything new in design, and most things between individual designs aren't. Now, the T-90 is supposed to sport a PKT 7.62 coaxial machine gun with and an NSVT 12.7mm or KPV 14.5mm anti-aircraft gun. Many of these we see covered or not even mounted or not in use, probably from a depletion of ammunition. Main armament is a 2A46M4 125mm main gun with a maximum effective range of about 4,000 meters. It has a concentric bore evacuator, yada, 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 and is capable of firing reflex or SVIR anti-tank guided missiles, which we have not yet seen from a single T-90 that is operated inside of Ukraine, to include the T-90M, its most modern variant. Automated carousel for loading, firing up to 8 rounds a minute. We never see them get that much off. The T-90s are fitted with the Arena CAS close-in defense system. We have yet to see, so the Arena CAS is designed, think of it like the trophy system for American designs. These are specifically designed to destroy incoming projectiles. So we have yet to see a single T-90 that has been fielded actually do this. We've not even seen it deploy its Arena CAS. So that's not necessarily a recipe for success. That means that these either weren't used, weren't fired, weren't dispensed, or weren't outfitted with them at all. The T-90 production capabilities that the Russians currently have are not very good. In fact, their tank factory is currently working on retrofitting T-62s and T-54s with outfitting them with IR floodlights, because when they were designed, that wasn't a thing yet. It has a 2-part electro-optical jammer, or STORA, positioned in the lower left and low right of the main gun. We have yet to see that ever do anything for any of the electronic optical equipment on any main battle tanks it has gone up against, or any electro-optical devices that have been used by ground forces, to include things such as the TOW system, specifically the M41A7 Sabre system, or the Javelin system, or any of their basic optics that they use on the battlefield. We have yet to see it jam a single thing. As a crew of 3, in extensive use of various types of explosive reactive armor, or ERA, which we have not yet seen be effective against dual warheads. So you don't see, it's good against a single warhead, but yeah, there's not really any. Yeah, you're not seeing anything impressive. Talking about Fred is saying that it is a special military operation, not a war. If it was a war, Russia would have already leveled Kiev and killed an entire government of Ukraine. They've already leveled entire cities. We've watched them do that to Mariupol, Marinka, and actually just outside of Kiev, because they weren't able to get close enough to do it. When they were trying to, when you go and look at places like Bucha or Bean, Hostomel. And you can also look, for instance, at what makes a war. Well, there's 2 large nations going at each other and fighting in a all-out war, in complete and total combat sanctioned by both sides. And then you also can tell the fact that you said 500,000 troops reportedly that went into this special military operation. The United States invaded Iraq, which is titled the Iraq War, or Operation Iraqi Freedom, with 425,000 troops. And that was a war. That was an actual war. Or the Afghan War. Or the Vietnam War. Or the Korean War. Both of those last two, by the way, are considered to be UN police actions. Legally. Technically speaking. Vietnam and Korea were both UN police actions. They were wars. Everyone calls them a war. You don't say the Vietnam UN police action. You don't say the Korean UN police action. You say the Korean War and the Vietnam War. It's a war. It's just a war. It's an international armed conflict. So anyway, those are the wonderful specs regarding the T-90. And its knockoff brother, the Type 85 TAC-3, is essentially the same thing, which is the Chinese tank variant. Both of them completely antiquated, as they are Soviet designs, and not very good. Russia's burning through NATO's ammo. No, not really. The amount of stockpile. In fact, the United States, way above my level, maintains a stockpile list that is, we have this much we can give and then we have the rest of this for ourselves in case we need to fight a giant war. So no, you're not. You're burning through what we had extra lying around. And if you look at what we've actually sent to Ukraine, most of it's shit we don't need anymore. Do you think we use the Humvee for anything? I didn't use a single Humvee except for training. I didn't use a single one on deployment. We were literally giving them away. It's hilarious. We were literally giving them away with the anticipation they'll get destroyed. You know what we were using? MRAPs. You know what we're not using anymore? MRAPs. Why? Because we're not fighting an insurgency to need them anymore. Cool. You know what we're getting now? The JLTV, the newest thing. It's a nice cross between the two. The M113 armored personnel carriers, never saw an active one in my entire career. That's weird because I was in a mechanized and motorized military force, and that was my job, was to kill the damn things. You think I would have seen one? Nope, just as target practice. Tank hauls in the middle of a field. M113, not usable anymore. Honestly, it was antiquated when it went into service during Vietnam. Need I say more? AT-4s, laws, the tow system. You've already told me about the 300 Patriot missiles a year. No, the U.S. only produces 300 Patriot missiles a year as of the last statistic you got, which was during peacetime for most countries because we weren't providing Patriot systems to anybody else. You know why we use 300? You know why the U.S. only needed to produce 300 Patriot missiles a year? Because that's how many they were shooting and training. You only have to replace what you use. Well, now we're producing a lot more because we don't need much more. You know, we didn't need more until now. We hadn't given a bunch away. So, yep. Once again, not all of that. Yeah, Raytheon already expanded production. Yes, they did. They did a lot, actually. In fact, I had a job offer. So, they expanded production. Exactly. They're literally pulling shit out of boneyards, man. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. We're giving away the things we don't care about anymore. There's not Abrams tanks. We were already selling. Like I said, Saudi Arabia uses the Abrams tank. Did I not just tell you I had a job offer from Raytheon? Like, dude, I know the people who make them. You know what they also make? The Javelin anti-tank missile and the TOW missile. My job. I know what Raytheon is capable of producing. You know what they did say they were having trouble producing a lot more of? They said that they were having a lot of issues producing things such as the Stinger because of some of the components needed to make the Stinger, specifically the semiconductors needed to make a Stinger, were in limited supply. You know what was also in limited supply for the manufacturing industry, for even the commercial vehicles inside of the United States at the time? Semiconductors and microchips. We're building a semiconductor plant in the United States. It'll be the very first one, and it's being put into Ohio. And secondly, I'm seeing a lot of wonderful work being done in the automotive manufacturing industry, considering that's where I work now. And we no longer have major part shortages because logistical chains were fixed. Moving on with the news here. One person was killed and 22 were injured in a missile strike as a Russian missile struck 2 residential buildings. As a result, a 2-year-old girl was killed and an additional 22 people, including 5 children, were injured. Russian forces continue to use inaccurate weapon systems and indiscriminate bombardments as tactics in their brutal war against Ukraine. These have killed and injured tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians unnecessarily. Attacks such as these are directly prohibited under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and are further covered in the Convention's Additional Protocol 1. Emergency and rescue crews are still on scene and did work tirelessly throughout the night and to pull survivors from the rubble. Take a look.
Тихо, тихо. Сейчас пожарные консультации.
And you can see there the level of destruction coming out. And you see it completely flattened this location. The Red Cross, who are on scene assisting with rescue efforts. Come Back Alive has been operating since 2014 as a non-governmental agency or organization. I mean, it's just an immense amount of destruction. That doesn't need to happen. And that really gets kind of to the whole heart of the conversation. And a lot of the hot takes, which I see a lot of people taking in this chat, especially tonight. It's always fun to see a lot of unruly individuals in the chat, because, and I've seen a lot of them claim to be veterans as well and things like that, and that's fine. And if you are, you know, of course, thanks for doing your time too, man. But here's kind of a big point. And I said it earlier, but I think it's important you have to look at this objectively. You talk about people being, well, Nazis and things like that. Well, what is a Nazi? A Nazi is someone who is part of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's what the term Nazi is. It's an acronym. It's a shortened phrase of someone from that party. They're not that. Neo-Nazis are racists, white supremacists. We don't see that. Christian white supremacists. We don't see that in a large number inside of Ukraine either. That's really the big thing. I mean, you take a look at, they say, what about Azov? Well, Azov was started as a far-right organization, and once it was integrated into the Ukrainian military, many of its commanders were actually relieved of command, as well as many other forces were pushed out of command. Once again, I'm not saying that Ukraine doesn't have issues. The United States certainly has issues with white supremacists inside of its military as well, and its police forces. In fact, many countries have that. Russia has an exceptionally high number of that. In fact, we've seen Russian troops on the front lines talking to people such as War Gonzo, talking about how they need to just kill Ukrainian people for being Ukrainian. That would be genocide. Be perpetuating genocide. You talk about, I mean, you're seeing, even in tonight's stream, homes leveled and destroyed, people brutally killed. For what purpose? Once again, Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Mariupol. So many people died in Mariupol that they're only digging mass graves for those that were somewhat not decomposed. If they are so far gone, the reports are that they are taking them and dumping them in landfills with the rubble. So, when you go, when you're talking about these situations, you're talking about how many tens of thousands, millions of people that are being killed, injured, displaced, and put through horrific trauma. And it's not the first time. It's not the first time. When I was in Syria, we saw entire villages leveled to the ground thanks to the Russian Air Force backing Assad. Villages just leveled to the ground. The immense amount of civilian casualties caused by the Russian bombardments of Aleppo and Idlib and of the entire Deir ez-Zor and the Middle Euphrates River Valley is insurmountable in number. I mean, you cannot fathom how many people were displaced. Sea of people. A literal sea of people as refugees, walking, many of them barefoot and carrying only what they had on their back, to a refugee camp where, as we've reported on in the past, the Russians will bomb them there too. After they blow up their home and kill their families, they will then bomb them on their way to the refugee camp and then bomb them once they get there. And anti-terrorism measures. So it's not even the first time. Fred and Fred. How about Fallujah? Why are you complaining when Russia does what America does? See, I actually knew many people who had fought in the Battle of Fallujah. Do you know what the difference was with the Battle of Fallujah? There was a deadline. During the Battle of Fallujah, second Battle of Fallujah specifically in 2004, the Marines, specifically, I want to say it was 36, moved into Fallujah. The deadline before the operation was provided both in English and in Arabic and in Kurdish as to when they needed to evacuate from the city before it was going to be declared hostile. They gave an immense amount of time, days, which actually allowed for the defenders, over, I want to say, what was it, like 1,500 something insurgents, to actually prepare the defensive infrastructure within the city. It's why it became some of the most brutal and bloody house-to-house fighting ever engaged in warfare for the United States. It's why it's so synonymous with such brutal fighting. It's because of the time that was allotted to allow as many people as possible to get out of the city. And even then, there was many steps taken. Even though the whole city was declared hostile, the rules of engagement were still restrictive against things that were not considered targets. Religious infrastructures, such as the mosques, where insurgents were used as billeting or sleeping quarters, as well as ammunition depots, and were actually engaging American troops from. Religious facilities, schools, hospitals, many of these things were being used to engage American forces because of their ability, because of the ability. That's why you didn't see people just throwing frags into every single room of a house. Certainly could have, but they didn't, to minimize civilian casualties. All of these things that you do, no matter how awful the situation is, you do to prevent civilian casualties, to the point of putting yourself at risk, which I've done it myself. My ROAs were so incredibly strict, it put us in danger at times. We don't see in Ukraine by the Russians. We don't see. We see entire towns leveled. We see apartment buildings being struck with drones and missiles. You see mass graves. You don't have to agree with the war in Iraq. You don't have to agree with the war in Afghanistan. You don't have to say that you don't have to be a firm believer that the U.S. has been the right guy every time. That's certainly not true. Definitely isn't true. The United States has not always been the best country in the world when it came to, making decisions militarily. The invasion of Iraq probably should have never happened. But when it did happen, there was at least attempts to carry it out in a way that minimized civilian casualties. And it cost the lives of many. That's the difference. It cost the lives of troops, not civilians. It's not supposed to be the other way around. That's why everyone got together in 1948 and 1949 to write the 1949 Geneva Conventions. Because of indiscriminate bombing campaigns. Because of the horrors of World War II. So, yeah. That's the difference. And with that, we move on into the rest of the international news. Come down here over into Kosovo. We see escalating situation there in Kosovo. The Kosovo Serbs living in the northern parts of the country once again calling for the Serbian government to move troops to the border of the country. Protesters sporting Russian and Serbian flags began street fights with Kosovo police and officials. As a result of the violent demonstrations, Italian military forces operating as part of NATO's Kosovo mission secured government buildings throughout the region and provided assistance to authorities. Dozens of NATO personnel have now also been injured as a result of clashes with the demonstrators. Take a look. Here we can see some of those Italian forces there with the demonstration. American forces were also located there. Couple of interesting arguments happening in the chat already. In regards with Kosovo, like says unpopular facts. Serbs have the right to retake Kosovo, but the moment they started genocide, they lost the right and gave Kosovo legitimacy. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you look at the 90s and the breakup of Yugoslavia, outside of, like, I want to say Moldova, maybe? Or not Moldova, but, shit. Montenegro, maybe? They, like, the breakup of the Yugoslavia was just horrific in every sense of the word. And by the time the NATO mission starts in Yugoslavia, or in former Yugoslavia, you have to imagine the amount of genocides and ethnic cleansing that had taken place was, I mean, horrific. The Serbs committing genocide against the Bosnian Muslims was just horrible. Now, pretty much everyone was killing each other, and then the NATO force comes in and things kind of quiet down, and then Serbia kind of gets upset and goes for Kosovo, who's trying to fight for independence. Except when they get there, they start just massacring people. Once again, keep in mind, for the last about almost 10 years, 5 to 10 years, the United States and NATO had just watched everyone in the region commit genocide against each other. And that's really when the NATO mission to Kosovo starts. And now it still continues. You can see that's still flaring up. This region right here, near the Adriatic Sea, former Yugoslavia, is an immensely fragile situation. And so you can see these things might start to flare up, especially as tensions between the two backers, Russia, the United States, and NATO, are going kind of head to head at the moment. So you'll see that these things will start to flare up as well. But yeah, 100. Pretty much, you commit genocide, you kind of just lose the right to, continue with whatever you're doing. In regards to U.S. collapse economically, it's not complex. We have 31.4 trillion in debt. One more bank run, and the whole U.S. economy collapses. It sounds like someone's a little upset about FRC collapsing. I had a buddy who actually invested rather heavily in FRC. It did not go well, as you can imagine. But the thing I think is important to note with the bank closures is the fact that was purposeful. Bank closures in the United States that happened were purposeful. Now, the bank run, maybe not so much, but the closures themselves are actually a good thing. So the reason why they were actually closed by the Federal Reserve, who is insuring these banks, and they took a look after 2008. Policy changes occurred, and so you see the whole policy change because no one wants the economy to go back to a 2008 situation, and now all of a sudden you see banks now starting to close. It means that those banks were doing exactly what led up to 2008. And so it pretty much triggered federal regulators going in and saying, yeah, you can't run a bank correctly, and then closing that bank and then auctioning off their assets. It appears to be most of the time to JP Morgan, who runs Chase Bank for those here in the U.S., but it's working. It means that they're picking up the slack, and it means that those banks are closing before it gets to the point that it becomes a problem. The failsafe is working, basically, is what's working, is what's happening right now. Jumping down here into the Middle East on the Iran and Afghan border, the border fights do continue. Fighting between Iran and Afghanistan continues, with both sides sending even more men and equipment to the region. Despite the military buildups, however, there's not really an increase in fighting along this border whatsoever. The fighting remains about as same in kinetic intensity as it was a week ago. There's just a lot more people kind of on standby now. And take a look here. You can kind of see the buildup, especially on the Taliban side. Looks like that is it for that one. Moving on, we come down here, and this is in Odisha, specifically near Balasore, which is here in India. And unfortunately, a train collision has killed at least 300 people. Two trains traveling in the state of Odisha in Georgia, or in India, collided. The death toll so far has risen over 300 people, with expectations it will be rising further. An investigation into the cause of the collision is already underway. The train was traveling from Calcutta to Chennai when it ran into several parked cars, and it was hit by a second freight train. Over 1,000 people have so far been reported injured, and what is many are calling at this point one of the deadliest train accidents in Indian history. Jumping down here and into Africa, just south of Mogadishu, 200 al-Shabaab militants were reportedly killed. The Ugandan military, operating as part of the UA's ATMIS mission, engaged al-Shabaab in a massive attack, which reportedly killed over 200 of the al-Qaeda-linked fighters. This came shortly after Ugandan troops were ambushed by al-Shabaab militants, taking severe casualties in the process. Oh, and that is a little bit too big, apparently, to show on the stream normally. We'll see if we can get this up and running. Now we continue up here into Ethiopia, and specifically the Tigray region of Ethiopia, where the Tigray Liberation Front, or TLF, met with the Ethiopian military in order to hand over their stockpiles of weapons and equipment used to fight against the Ethiopian government and Eritrean government. So over the several past years of fighting, this is all in accordance into to the peace deal, which was brokered late last year, earlier this year, between the two factions. You can see here them signing that. You see all the PKMs and Dishkas and everything else that they've been using over the years. Jumping up over here and into Nova Scotia near Halifax, wildfires have led to widespread evacuation orders. Intense wildfires near the Canadian city of Halifax led to the Canadian government ordering thousands of households to evacuate. Wildland firefighters continue to battle the blaze, and as of today, firefighters are now saying that that the fire is now 100% contained. Over 350 structures, including 150 homes, were so far destroyed in the blaze. And so, yeah, quite an immense amount of, quite a pretty bad situation for the people of Halifax. It's not a very large, it's not a very small city, I should say, either. It's a pretty big city. They said somewhere about 500,000 people were given evacuation orders. This is one of many fires that are actually raging inside of Canada at the moment. They are battling very large wildfires all over the country. And so it's kind of been a very difficult past week or two for everyone inside of the country. A lot of homes being destroyed, a lot of people being evacuated, a lot of fires and not enough firefighters to fight them. So we'll be kind of following those developments. And I know a lot of people that have been watching this channel are there in Canada. So I'll kind of give you the updates on that. And so with that, that's actually all of the major news stories that we are covering in the past week of news here. There's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of things that have been said on and off inside of the chats. Some of them not exactly what I prefer to see here, but it does, I guess, help the algorithm to help us raise the amount of views we get. But yeah, overall, there's a lot of terrible situations in the world, regardless of how you look at it. Regardless of what side you're on, regardless of what the situation is, one thing that everyone can back is the fact that it's hurting a lot of innocent civilian people. Whether you're talking about mass hunger, whether you're talking about a lot of, whether you're talking about a lot of civilian casualties as a result of a conflict somewhere, terrorism, regardless of what you see happening in the world, a lot of innocent people are affected by it. And so that's why the whole objective of this program, the whole objective of this project that we're doing here is to try and raise awareness for these situations and to help people that are in need. So please be sure to jump down into that video description. Check out all of the wonderful organizations that are down there in that description. 70% or more of the donations that they receive go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people, with 30% or less going to things such as salaries and administration's costs. And if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is give us that like and subscribe, share our stuff amongst your friends and communities, and of course the comments and messages always help. And in the meantime, I hope that you guys will be safe. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. We'll be back live once again at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday of next week. In the meantime, we'll be trying to put out whatever we can for you guys and to try and get as much as we can for the stream coming up. So I hope to see you guys back then. And I hope that you guys, once again, have a great week. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night and a fantastic upcoming week, everybody. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чутно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше швехуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чутно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. Идите We'll come and help you fit it in your skull. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з вогном. І стоять до волновах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з вогном. І стріляє до волновах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з вогном. І стріляє до волновах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з вогном. І стріляє до волновах і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.